My name is T. I function as George's writer's assistant. I'm terrified of being up here right now. But alas, there was no interviewer, so here I am. You're welcome in advance.
We're winging it. Yes, I thought we were up here to answer questions, but thank you for stepping in. Oh.
No. So, George, about everyone in here knows that you grew up in Bayonne, New Jersey. Parris, where did you grow up?
I was born in Hell's Kitchen, New York City. My family moved down to work for the Kennedy administration to Washington, D.C. And after that, I've been all over the place. I lived on the East Coast for quite some time, and then I ran away from home and joined the circus. And no, I did.
It's true.
I ran away from home and joined the circus. And when I called my mother to tell her that at the age of 26 I was running away from home to join the circus, there was a long silence. And I was like, Mom, are you there? And there was a deep sigh from my long-suffering, sainted Irish-American mother. And she said, well, I've been expecting this. So that's the way it's been. And still loving the circus today.
When did you... Yeah.
Oh, okay.
When did you two first lock eyes?
1975 at a science fiction convention of all places. Who can imagine? In Nashville, Tennessee, called Kubla Khan. I don't know if I should tell this story of how we met. Are there any impressionable young people in the audience? They should leave. They should leave. Stick cotton in their ears
If
here.
you're under 18, no, really, your parents would be upset. So scrunch down in your seat and pretend you didn't hear any of this.
You have to remember that 1975 was a different era in fandom and in the world. Even though it had a 7 in it, it was still kind of like the 60s. And fandom was wilder and more crazy then. One of the things that happened at a lot of conventions in America back in the 60s and 70s was skinny dipping parties where we would take over the hotel pool and skinny dip. Usually after the lifeguards had gone off duty or something like that. And in 1975 at Kubla Khan in Nashville, Tennessee, they had no lifeguard. They did have a pool and they had a couple saunas attached to it for men and women, but we decided in the name of
Fighting the patriarchy.
liberation, breaking down gender roles, we decided that we would break down this gender exclusion and liberate the men's and women's saunas and make them both co-ed saunas. So I was sitting with a bunch of my naked friends in the women's sauna when Parris walked in. And she said, do you remember the line you said when you saw us there?
I said, yes, naked pros.
Now,
Referring, of course, to Jack Kerouac, Allen Ginsberg, and Ferlinghetti of a generation long before.
she said it in the voice of W.C. Fields, of course. The men in the audience will understand this. I don't know if you women were, but you know, when a man meets an attractive woman who's interested in, you know, the code of the time requires to be cool about it and not to show too much interest. You know, but sometimes when you're naked, your interest becomes immediately apparent. As it did upon that occasion. But then we spent the next few days chicken fighting in the hotel pool, you know, because again, there was no lifeguards. We could do anything we want. So we were on each other's backs and splashing in the hotel pool and knocking people over. And that was how we first met. Many years later when...
Wait, you're forgetting the important part.
Oh, dear. Okay, say the important part.
After we met at the convention, he went off 6 months later and got married to somebody else.
And you joined the circus.
And I ran away from home and joined the circus.
These things were not connected, I don't believe.
Did you write during that time? You had no contact?
No, we had constant contact. Yeah, we did write, and we saw each other at other conventions in Philadelphia and at World Cons, at the 1974 World Con in Washington, D.C.
We didn't meet in 1974.
Oh, that's right. That was before. What World Con? Well, I saw you at PhilCon, subsequent to that.
And then there was Denvention.
And Big Mac.
Oh, and Big Mac, that's right.
In '76, the Mid-American.
The infamous Big Mac.
Yes.
Yes.
But after I divorced someone else, and Parris, you know, we got together at conventions, and Parris ultimately moved to Santa Fe, New Mexico, where I was living. We had these friends who we met in Santa Fe. They had a beautiful home on the east side. We met them through Roger Zelazny, who lived there. And this couple, these friends, they were great party throwers. They would throw parties every few months. And they wouldn't just throw a party where, you know, come and drink and have fun in their beautiful home. Their parties would always have a theme. It would be like a Roman party, and everybody would have to wear togas or something like that. Or it would be a Halloween party, and you would have to come in costume as something. And
in July.
We attended a number of these until the day they called me up and said, well, we're throwing a party. We'd like you in Paris to attend. I said, oh, great. What's the theme of this one? And they said, the theme is, come dressed as you were when you first met. We did not attend that particular party.
No, they had children. George wondered if we could get away with just wearing a towel, but I said that was cheating.
That would be cheating, yes.
But then you started hanging out. When did you ask her out on a date? Sorry, I'm really interested in this.
We're fans. We don't date. We go to conventions and see each other.
Right.
But we don't date.
But you played role-playing games together, and you were there for the start of Wild Cards too, weren't you, Parris?
Yes,
Yeah.
I'm one of the co-founders of the Wild Card universe. So if you need my signature, just stop me anywhere. I'll happy to sign any Elephant Girl stories you have out there.
Yeah, that was her character in the game that began Wild Cards and subsequently in the Wild Card universe, Elephant Girl, who, oddly enough, worked for the circus and could transform into a full-grown
Flying elephant.
Asian elephant who could fly by flapping her ears. Parris saw Dumbo at a very formative age.
I was going to say, inspired by your time during the circus, no doubt. But you're still a big animal lover now, and in fact, you have the wolf sanctuary, right? Is that in New Mexico? And you're also involved in other
The Wild
charities like
Spirit
that.
Wolf Sanctuary, yes, we're big supporters of that. And that really started with our fans, some of whom were in the audience, the wonderful people from the Brotherhood Without Banners. Why don't you tell about that, Phipps?
The bros, our beloved bros, a couple of years they sent us presents for Christmas, and I thought this was really cool, but I was like, hey, guys, like, could you do a good deed in our name? Because we already get a lot of cool prezzies. And they were like, yeah. So one of their leaders, Loden Garl the Three-Fisted, discovered a wolf-dog hybrid sanctuary in New Mexico. And they adopted one of the wolves down there and supported its food and medical care. His name was Sasquatch. And I thought that was so cool, so I started contributing as well. And about 12 years ago, you know, we had become friendly with the people who run the place, and you know, most of the time, these were rescues of either pure wolves or wolf dogs in captivity that nobody could manage anymore. A lot of them were discovered to be in counties or cities that had zoning regulations against keeping these kind of animals, and the only way the city would handle things like this is they would immediately euthanize the animal. And this is one of the reasons why I beg you to please never ever buy or encourage someone to buy a wolf-dog hybrid, because you don't know if you're getting a dog or a wolf or both. And the wolf side doesn't deserve to be living in the domestic world. And the dog side doesn't deserve to be a wolf who wants to love humans. So for many years, they usually would get packs in one by one. But one year they did an emergency rescue to Oklahoma, and they found a large number of Arctic wolf hybrids who had been living in 8 by 10 chain link fenced pens on concrete. And the owner was a breeder/hoarder who had become physically unable to care for these animals. And so her neighbors had been like throwing Purina dog chow bags over the fences at the animals. And so when it came time to rescue them, they were able to save eventually just a dozen of them out of the 30-plus animals that they found at this woman's place. And you know, as they always do when they have new adoptees, they drove all night through Oklahoma, which, believe me, is a long drive. And then they drove all the way to western New Mexico, which is where Wild Spirit is located. But they knew nothing about these animals. They knew nothing about the conditions in which they'd raised them, except for what they could see. And they certainly didn't know their names. So I asked them if they would name them after characters in A Song of Ice and Fire. So we have our own Westeros pack down at Wild Spirit. Unfortunately, we've lost a few members because they are getting to that age, and because of their poor care and nutrition in their youth, they've suffered with a lot of age-related problems and even just arthritis. So we have our own Sansa, and we just lost Summer, which made us very sad. But we still have a pack down there, and we're going to adopt new wolves into the pack. So if you ever want to do a good deed in my name, please help out Wild Spirit. They're good folks, and I'm in love with one of their wolves. His name is Flurry. I know I'm not allowed to keep him because he's a wolf, but he comes to presentations with Leighton, who runs the place, to explain why you can't keep wolves as pets. And then Flurry comes and puts his big wolf head on my foot and goes, "Hi, Parris, how are you doing?" And I can't adopt you, you're a wolf. And he's like, "But you'd like to, wouldn't you?"
It really is an amazing place. If any of you were ever in southwestern New Mexico, and you can visit and tour the place. They have close to 60 wolves and wolf dog hybrids. As Parris said, there was a fashion for a while of breeding wolves with dogs to produce these wolf dogs, but then the people who adopt them as cute little puppies can't handle them when they grow up, and so they wind up at Wild Spirit. It's not a breeding sanctuary. They don't produce any new things. They just give a sanctuary and a home to these animals, and they have, besides the wolves and the wolf dogs, they have coyotes, they have dingoes from Australia, they have New Guinea singing dogs, one of the most rare breeds of dogs in the world.
All of which come from hoarding situations, from people who had breeding licenses and were allegedly part of various forms of protecting the genetic mix of a certain species of dogs that the people got licenses to bring dingoes into the country, but they became hoarders and they kept no lists of who had bred with whom, and so these animals could not be used as part of a conservation program, and the vast majority of them are put down.
The place it is, it's in a place called Candy Kitchen, New Mexico, which is a tiny little speck of a town, but it has a fairly interesting and colorful history itself. During Prohibition in the United States, there were an operation there that was making illegal booze. And of course, there were federal agents who were trying to shut down anyone making illegal booze. And one of the ways they could find you if you were making booze is you needed sugar to make it. And any place that was getting more sugar than it seemed warranted would be a red flag to the federal agents, so they would track it down. So the good people of this small New Mexico town established a little candy operation to explain why they were getting all this sugar, because they were making candy, and hence the name Candy Kitchen. And they made a little bit of candy, but they made a lot of moonshine as well.
Nice. Let's get back to this being fans, you two. Now, this is going to be a broad question, so let's just consider the 1980s. Give me the weirdest, funniest experience you've had at a Worldcon in the 80s. I vaguely remember, I'm not sure if I'm supposed to say this, but in my defense, I know nothing about doing this, so I'm fine. There was a tub filled with Jell-O at one point for a party, so let's just start there.
Okay, that's not the 80s, that's the 70s. That's not my story. That's Joe W. Haldeman. I had nothing to do with it, but Parris was deeply involved.
I made the Jell-O. along with the help of Susan Applegate, and we bought out every supermarket within a 10-mile area. It was 147 boxes of lime Jell-O.
Now let me set the stage for this here. Is Joe, who is around this convention and will probably be deeply mortified that we're telling this story after all these years. Joe made the mistake of, on some panel or something, I don't even know the context where he first said it, but it became a standard joke that he had a fantasy about having 2 naked women in a tub of lime Jell-O. So he made this joke often enough that some of the fans at the time determined that they would make his fantasy a reality. And that was at the 74 convention in Washington, D.C.
The infamous 74 Worldcon. Jell-O was about 29 cents a box at the time, so it really wasn't that hard to raise enough money to buy 146 boxes of Jell-O. The only thing that we had forgotten was that we needed a hell of a lot of ice to set the Jell-O. And at this time, the convention center did not have vast ice-making machines. And so I was given the route, the secret route to the sacred mother of ice machines. And I was actually dressed to go to a Regency tea party that afternoon. So I'm in a Regency gown, and I have my hair done up in little curls, and I'm dragging these 2 enormous trash bags, in garbage cans to fill with ice. And people are trying to follow me because they figure I must know where this secret ice machine is. So I'm trying to shake them off my tail while wearing this beautiful Regency gown and carrying 2 large cans full of ice. It was quite an adventure. And but we got it.
Many people were involved in this, of course. It was very complex. There were a couple guys who were assigned to keep Joe going to parties to make sure he didn't go back to his room while the Jell-O was being made in his hotel bathtub.
I understand. Makes sense.
They succeeded in doing that. And discretion prevents me from naming the 2 women who participated in that part of it. And we will draw a curtain over what actually happened when they brought Joe back to his room and he found his quip come to life. I do know, however, that Joe would often say, regardless of what happened there, the next morning he woke up and he had a tub full of lime Jell-O. And then there was the problem of what would the hotel think of this? And he thought, well, I'll just run the hot water and it'll melt. But there was a lot of Jell-O, so when he ran the hot water, a little bit of it melted, but a lot of the water started piling up and flowing over the sides of the bathtubs, and it became quite a task.
Yeah, more stories like that.
Well, there are no more stories about that. Although it was, for the next decade, whenever Joe showed up at a science fiction convention anywhere in the United States, he would be presented with a box of lime Jell-O. Everyone seemed to think this was an original and hilarious thing to give to him. And actually, the hilarious thing was Joe doesn't even like lime Jell-O. But he would take these home, and his cupboard was filled with hundreds of boxes of lime Jell-O. I think Bob Tucker, who was a famous fan and writer of the same era in fandom, no longer with us, sadly. Bob Tucker had a better idea. Wherever he showed up, he was known to like Beam's Choice liquor, and they would give him a bottle of Beam's Choice. So if you're going to speak in fandom about something, you're better off saying that you like a expensive liquor than a 29-cent box of Jell-O. Because fans remember and they'll give you these things.
Who hosted the wildest parties at all these conventions?
We did.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Go on.
We did. We created the Hugo Losers Party at Kansas City in 1976. We went around because we were losers, we went around to all the other parties, and in those days there used to be publishers' parties. And we would bag half a jug of Gallo wine and somebody's semi-stale super bag of potato chips as our refreshments at the Hugo Losers Party, because we were losers and were too poor to actually be able to fund a party. So we just begged, and people took pity on us for many years.
I don't know. I mean, yes, we did start the Hugo Loser parties, and they were great, but I don't know if they were the wildest parties. Now, there were, at the New York convention, LunaCon, there was a party thrown every year called SleazyCon, and that was the name of the party, and it always started at midnight when all the other parties were ending at the LunaCon. So you would go to, it was put on by a guy named Mal Warb, who also made X-rated films under the name Carter Stevens. And he would stock his room, which sometimes was a large suite, but a lot of times was just a tiny sleeping room. And all the other parties would be shutting down. Everybody would come to SleazyCon and squeeze in and party till dawn. We were hardy partiers in those days. I don't know if I can do that anymore, but I certainly did my share of it in those days. And there were the skinny dipping things that I talked about. My favorite story about that was from 1979, when there was in Louisville, Kentucky, was the NASFIC. The convention had gone overseas to Britain, I believe. And when the convention goes overseas, then there's a North American Science Fiction Convention, which is kind of a world con. And in 1979, it was held at the Galt House in Louisville, Kentucky, a very, very historic hotel that was right on the banks of the Ohio River. And the Galt House actually has quite a history. It's even in my novel Fever Dream, because it goes back to antebellum days. But it has been rebuilt over the years. And the Galt House that we were conventioning in 1979 was a fairly modern Galt House. And it had a big swimming pool. And once again, as often happened in the 70s, when the sun went down, a group of fans decided that they would have a skinny dipping party in the hotel swimming pool. The lifeguard was off duty, and so about a dozen fans came up. Fans are not necessarily in the greatest physical shape in the world. They don't get a lot of sun. They're not exactly tan. They spend their time reading books. So they were having fun. They were swimming around after dark in this swimming pool. What they didn't know, though, was that the swimming pool had a glass side that opened on the hotel restaurant and bar. So all of the people who were in the restaurant and bar having their dinner or having drinks could see behind the bartender these large, pale, white shapes flashing by. And my dear friend, Gardner Dozois, who you could always count on for a comment, looked up and said it in his high, squeaky voice, in case anybody had missed what was happening, "Look, manatees!" Gardner, we lost Gardner, sadly, and I miss him so much. He collaborated with me on many anthologies, and he was the funniest guy in science fiction, and one of the greatest editors the field has ever known. But I'll always remember, every memory I have of Gardner is memories of things like that, of laughter of one sort or another.
How am I doing on time? Anybody have a watch?
It's been 10 minutes. Keep going.
It's 2:30. Okay.
Do you have any Gardner stories, Sips?
Not that I want to recount in a crowd this large. Let's see, what can we talk about?
I have a logistical question. So you guys were both living in Santa Fe at that time?
No.
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 No. When did you move to Santa Fe, both of you?
He moved there in 79.
79.
Yeah.
She moved there in 81.
81.
Yeah, he made me. I was living in Portland, Oregon. I had a really nice life going. I was working at a lesbian restaurant. I was the token heterosexual on the floor. And I also worked part-time in a science fiction bookstore. And I really loved my life, and I had dreams of getting an old Victorian and restoring it over the years. But George had convinced me to come down to see Santa Fe after the Worldcon in Denver, Denvention. And so I came down, and Gardner Dozois and his wife Susan Casper and their young teenage son Christopher, who's now a full grown-up guy that confuses me every time I look at him, and they came down, and I was supposed to be there for a few weeks. George was going off to a convention and a workshop and something else in the UK, but he took me to a restaurant called Tomasita's and got me a green chili roast beef burrito along with Tomasita's famous sopapillas. And I had nothing to compete with.
That sounds like a date.
I was like, damn it, I can never leave this city again. And it's true, like 3 or 4 weeks, if you're a New Mexican, after about 3 or 4 weeks on the road, you start to kind of feel it and hear it in your sleep going like, gee, a green beef, a green burrito covered in green chili sauce would really be a great breakfast this morning, and you have to go home at that point. Otherwise, you start looking for Mexican restaurants in places that should not have Mexican restaurants, like Scotland. No, don't try the pizza in Scotland.
Yes, green chili is deeply addictive. That is well known. That Denver convention was Denver Worldcon in '81 was amazing. It had some of the funniest program items that I've ever seen in all my half century of attending that. Howard Waldrop did there maybe the funniest one-man show I've ever seen at a science fiction convention, where Howard presented the entire history of science fiction film by himself.
In 3D.
With props, yes. When you came into the room,
3D.
there were there were red and blue 3D glasses on every seat. And so Howard is acting out every science fiction film of the 40s and 50s. And at a certain point he said, and then 3D started. And you all have to put on your glasses now. So we all put on our 3D glasses. And then Howard started throwing crumpled up paper at the audience, shouting, meteorites, meteorites. And it was just like the meteor storms in the science fiction films of the 50s. And he had a tub of red Jell-O that he did to enact the blob.
What is it with Jell-O? What the hell?
Jell-O, it's everywhere. You can't be a fan without Jell-O.
So these conventions are held all over, all the time. Didn't you guys take a train to the convention, or do you caravan to them? I know you took like a cross-country road trip to one in Kansas City, I believe. Like, tell me about these.
We tried that, but that was a disaster. That didn't work out.
What happened?
Oh, the train, we had the wrong day on the train. But, but yeah, in the old days, we get a, I mean, nobody had any money back then in the 70s. Everybody got to conventions however you know, could get to conventions. You know, you drove if you happened to own a car, or you rode with a friend who had a car, or, you know, a series of friends and a series of cars caravanning across the country. Yeah, there was, we got there by hook or by crook, and of course nobody could afford a hotel room either. You can't get away with this stuff these days. I mean, the hotel would, you have a skinny dipping party, you all be arrested these days, and you know, people would check in. Yes, I have a single. And let me check in. I have a reservation. Oh, thank you, Mr. Martin. And how many keys would you like? 14. For all your friends who would be sleeping all over the floor and in the bathtub with the room that you think. How many friends did you share hotel rooms with in those days, Sips?
8 to 12. I was smart, though. Like, I didn't quibble over any part of the bed. Because, you know, some people would like to say, I'll put the mattress on the floor in this corner, and somebody will go, oh, well, I'll take the box springs. Don't ever take the box springs. Don't, just the floor is better. And I usually would claim my space by bringing my old beat-up sleeping bag that I had taken to Woodstock, and I would put it in the closet. Because if you slept in the closet, you were unlikely to be stepped on in the middle of the night by somebody using the toilet. So that's usually where we found me, at least partially in the closet.
How many of you here, let's have a show of hands, are attending your first convention?
Oh, yay, welcome.
Yes,
I hope
indeed.
yours is as fun for you as mine was. I can tell you a story about my first
I would love
Worldcon.
that.
Okay, like, I knew nothing about fandom. I had a vague idea it existed because at the back of Analog magazine, there would be a listing of science fiction conventions, but there was no explanation about what they were about. So I sent off a self-addressed stamped envelope to DiscCon, which was the Worldcon in '74, and all I got back was this flyer that said when it was going to be held and where it was going to be held. And I worked for years in the restaurant business, and you know, your best nights to work are the weekends. And if you're a good worker, your boss wants you to work on the weekends. So I never got to go anywhere on the weekends. And so I actually told my bosses in May that I would be taking off a weekend in August to go to this thing called the Science Fiction World Convention, which I knew nothing about. And, you know, my boss went, yeah, and I would remind him every once in a while. And sure enough, on Thursday, when I said, I'll see you guys Monday night, my boss is like, what do you mean? Where are you going? I'm going off to my Worldcon. I don't care what you say. And, you know, and I turned up, and I didn't really know anybody. I didn't know what the protocol was. I didn't know nothing. And I had the best damn time of my life. And after about 6 hours, I, you know, looked over one of the main convention rooms and went, my people, where have you been all my life? And, you know, and discovered so much joy And my best friend at one point grabbed me, and this was at the Sheridan Park in D.C., if anybody remembers this. It used to be like a 3-mile trek from one end of it to the other, because there was multiple hotels that had been bought and built around the original Sheridan Park. And so she drags me from the front of the hotel on Connecticut Avenue and drags me up and down and through the hotel. And then she shoves me in front of this man who has dark hair and a goatee, and he's wearing an ascot because he's groovy. And she goes, "This is my friend Parris. She introduced me to you by giving me Stand on Zanzibar." And I went, "Hi, Mr. Brunner. Really big fan of your work." And just stood there, sucking my thumb, going, I don't know what I'm supposed to say to this writer who I admire so much. And it was like that the rest of the weekend, as I kept, running into people like Harlan Ellison and going, I'm an idiot right now, but actually I'm a normal person, but you're Harlan Ellison, and I don't know what to say to you. So it was like that. But I had so much fun, and I met so many people. I decided to go back, and that's what I did. I just kept coming back.
My experience was a little earlier. I went to my first convention also, oddly enough, in Washington, D.C., where I was a graduate student in journalism doing an internship, political reporting on Capitol Hill. But there was the local Washington convention, Disclave, and that was the first convention I went to. And the first person I met was Gordon Dozois. He had not yet become an editor. He had published a few stories, but he was working the registration desk. And I'd published one story, and he had been instrumental in buying it. So Gardner was my introduction to science fiction fandom, but also my introduction to my professional career. And, he introduced me all the weekend. This is George. I fished him out of the slush pile. But like Parris, and I hope like all of you who raised your hands, I had this feeling, well, I found my place at last, and it was amazing those early years in fandom. There weren't nearly as many conventions then as there were now. There was Worldcon every year. There were few regional conventions, MidwestCon in Cincinnati, which was a relaxicon where people just hung around the pool. There was LunaCon in New York. Not nearly as many now. There's like every American city has 3 conventions during the year, but they were few and far between in those days. But it was amazing to get together to people, and you meet people at one convention, and then you see them at others. It was a family reunion. I mean, I've been interviewed at this leading up to this convention about, well, why do I go to Worldcon, et cetera. And yeah, there are professional reasons. I do interviews, I publicize my books and all that, but mostly I go to see my friends and for this sense of family reunion. I mean, I remember when I was living in Chicago in the early 70s, I had just graduated from Northwestern University, which is right north of Chicago, and I was working for Cook County Legal Assistance as a VISTA volunteer. And I would throw these big parties, and I would invite science fiction friends from Chicago fandom, and I would invite my college friends, many of whom were chess players because I was on the chess team, and I would invite my lawyer and VISTA volunteers and paralegal friends from the Legal Assistance Foundation I worked at, and the 3 groups would hardly mingle at all. They would be in different places at this gigantic old rundown apartment I lived in with 6 roommates. And if you had asked me at the time, I would have said, well, my college friends, these are guys I'm really, really close to. I'd just been attending college with them for years. And these lawyer friends, and VISTA volunteer friends, I work with them every day. And now there's these weird science fiction people I hang out with a little too. But you know, something funny happened to them in the ensuing decades is you fall out of touch with your college friends. You know, you stop seeing them, you stop hearing from them. Pretty soon it's like a Christmas card. You fall out of touch with the people you work with when you no longer work with them. But fandom is forever, man. I mean, those people I met in Chicago fandom, I still see it at conventions like this. You, for good or ill, you form relationships that last you the rest of your life, even if you only see them once or twice a year at conventions.
If you can't see my tattoo, it's a rocket ship that says Feel Wall, and then the other side of it says Ad Astra. And that was my 50th birthday to tattoo for myself. Because for me, fandom did indeed become a way of life, and I'm thankful to the gods for granting me their blessing.
Fandom is a way of life. Fear wall. That's an old fanish phrase for those you coming in. Even before Parris and I were born, fans were debating that. There was fear wall and fandom is a way of life, and then on the other side there was fajag or something. Fandom is just a goddamn hobby. Right. And these were the two sides of the argument. But I think Parris and I are both firmly on the fear wall side of that fence.
George, have you ever been starstruck?
What about Star Trek?
Starstruck. But we can talk about Star Trek all day. Any Deep Space Nine fans? Woo! Excuse me, sir. I have the microphone.
Yes?
No, but yeah, at a Worldcon, have you ever been starstruck meeting someone when you were first starting to go?
In the early 70s, yeah. I mean, I had made some professional sales, so I had, when I started going to conventions, I had 2 professional sales, 1 story out, and then in the early 70s, I was publishing more and more stories. But what was fascinating about science fiction in those days was that almost everybody was still alive. I mean, Stanley G. Weinbaum, a very great writer of the 30s, had died prematurely young, and Cyril Kornbluth had died in the 50s. These were like the only people in the history of science fiction who were dead. Everybody else was still around, and in those early conventions, I got to meet them all. Of course, I got to meet Asimov and Heinlein. I got to meet A. Van Vogt. I got to meet Edmund Hamilton, the World Buster, and Catherine Moore, and Lee Brackett, and Murray Leinster, and I never met Hugo Gernsback, but he was around at those days. That's the guy the Hugo Awards are named after. It was like science fiction conveyed immortality. I met Clifford Simak. He was the guest of honor at the first Worldcon I ever went to. Frederick Pohl, Jack Vance, the list went on and on. Like, everybody was still there, the living history of science fiction, and I was in awe of most of them. And, I can say that, yes, I met Murray Leinster and I shook his hand, but, like Parris with John Brunner,
I was just going to ask.
Yeah. I love your work, Mr. Leinster, sir.
Have sweaty palms like me right now. Nervous laughter.
So it was, it was pretty amazing. And Harlan, of course, who Parris mentioned. I met Harlan at 72 at the Lunacon. That was another hilarious panel, by the way. I'm remembering great panels from past. You'll see writers on panels at this convention who have published like 2 or 3 stories, I guess, and somehow they're on a panel. This is something new, In the old days, first of all, there was only 1 track of programming, so it was hard to get on the panel. I went to conventions for 5 or 6 years before anybody ever asked me to be on a panel. Not only had I been nominated for a Hugo and lost it, but I had actually won a Hugo before I got to be on a panel. And when I did get on a panel, it was what they called the Young Writers Panel. They segregated all, believe it or not, I was young once. They put all the young writers, they weren't quite eligible or senior enough to be on the real big panels. They were on the Young Writers Panel. So I was on a panel with Joe Haldeman and Gardner Dozois and Jay Haldeman and George Alec Effinger and Jack Dan and a few other Young Writers panels at like 20 different conventions, and the panel was just called the Young Writers Panel, or sometimes the Young Turk Panel. After a decade in the field, I finally was old enough to get off of the Young Writers Panel. But the best Young Writers Panel I was in the audience for, I was not on it, and that was the one at Lunicon in 1972, where Harlan Ellison was the moderator, and they had Jack Dan, Gardner Dozois, George Al Geffinger, and I think one of the Haldemans on it. And Harlan decided to conduct this panel like, and I don't know if those of you who are from Ireland or England have ever heard of this, but there was a terrible American daytime television show called Queen for a Day, in which women who were living miserable, impoverished lives had to come on and tell how miserable and impoverished they were and the things that they were going for. And whoever was the most impoverished and miserable would be voted by the audience to Queen for a Day, and then they would give her a washing machine and a papier-mâché crown, and everybody would applaud her. So Harlan decided that these young writers should tell how miserable and poor they were, and they were all trying to top each other to do that thing. And I remember Gardner said, I'm so poor that I eat my cornflakes with water. And George Al Geffinger said, "You had cornflakes?" And then at the end of the panel, Harlan said, well, we have to help these guys eat this weekend, so let's have a sea of green. Everybody hold up a dollar bill. Nobody hold up any dollar bills. So then Gardner chimed in and said, first one to hit Jack Dan's nose with a quarter wins a prize. And suddenly there were quarters flying by the hundreds, and Jack had to duck under a table. But they did raise about $20, so all the young writers got to eat that weekend.
Nice. So we're almost done here, but I have one more question. It's clear by looking at you both that you still love and deeply respect one another, and I love a love story. So in a sentence or in a word, what's your secret? Because maybe it can be ours too.
Do we have a secret?
We've never melded our libraries or music collections.
That's it. We're together in many ways, but not that. So we have to buy 2 copies of books by all of our friends.
Every once in a while, he says to me, probably 30% of our book collections are duplicates, and we should really, merge our collections. And I'm like, okay, who's giving up their Zelazny? My Zelazny's are signed. I'm not giving up my Zelazny's. So we just, keep buying more bookcases.
So books. That's the secret.
Books and fandom, memories.
Grateful Dead
Memory.
shows.
We have all these memories that we share together. Right?
Friendship and laughter too. I see that a lot.
Oh, yeah, that too. And that's what fandom is all about. And those of you coming here for the first time, I hope you find that. I hope at this first convention, not only do you have fun buying things in the dealer's room and seeing the wonders of the art show and enjoying panels, but you make friends that you'll have for the rest of your lives.
And maybe you'll find your Parris.
That's right.
Aww.
Okay. I think that's it. How do you wrap up a panel?